Welcome back to my GMC Sonoma project that's been taking me almost 20 years to complete. First off, I want to say thank you and welcome to my new subscribers. I really do appreciate it. In this episode, I'll continue working on the 4-link mounts. I'll finish up the lower mount and build a crossmember that goes in between them. I also bring out a tool I've had before and try to revive it. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go according to plan. Anyway, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is finally weld up the tabs permanently. As you can see, I pushed out the metal insert from the bushing, bolted it in together. That way I could keep the distance between the two tabs equal. I'll start off on the outsides and then weld on the insides. That way, if this wants to move in this way, this tab will help hold it back. And when I weld it that way, it's going to try to move the tab back away from it. Then let it cool and I'll come back for the inside. This was an awkward position to weld since it's very close to the frame, but I did persevere and got it done. This side's a bit easier to weld, but it still was tricky because I was welding uphill. Once I finished welding, I used compressed air to cool everything down just to speed things up so I could get back to welding again. I tried welding the inside of the tabs with the TIG, but I ran into space constraints with the torch, so I decided to use my MIG welder instead. In my last video, I struggled with some of the gaps I had on the bracket. To clean things up, I went over it with the MIG welder and then sanded it down with a flat disc and Rolllock sanding disc. And it came out looking pretty good. So since I'm out of argon and it's the weekend, I really don't want to slow things down. So I'm going to use the MIG welder to move myself forward. So a few things I'm going to do is, one, I'm going to do the inside weld here. I was originally going to wait until I flip the frame over and TIG weld it, but I can access it with the MIG welder, so I might as well do it now. I want to get as much welding done before I actually flip it. Secondly, I'm going to build a cover here out of 1/8 steel, put that on, and I will MIG weld it again, and I'll clean it up similar to what I've done over here. And then lastly, there are some spots up in here in the corners that, again, with the MIG welder, I could get in. It won't be so bad even up here. Here's what it looks like all welded up. And now all cleaned up. So here's something that I was a little worried was going to happen, and it did. When I welded this on, I had the bushing insert here to stop this from actually expanding. But what it did do is contract it, and you can see it's tough. And the reason for that is this. Hear that pop? That is the tabs coming back in and squeezing together. Now I have a plan for this, so I'm not worried right now, but it's just unfortunate. Probably what would have been better is if I added some metal similar to here on top and tacked it in, then that would hold it back from squeezing too much. Now it could still squeeze on the ends, but right now the pivot point is back here on both sides. So that's a lot of pivot there. If you weld a piece that comes across here, then your pivot point is a lot shorter and harder for it to come in. Anyways, lessons learned, but I know I could fix this. So I insert some threaded rod with some washers and nuts. This will allow me to spread apart the tabs by turning the nuts away from the center of the mount. I do have to keep in mind that the metal is going to want to spring back, and to compensate for that, I spread the tabs further apart than I need to. The first time I did this, it wasn't enough, and with a bit of trial and error, I was able to put the metal bushing insert back in place. So as I sit in this awkward spot, and it's awkward because of this cross member here, I can't take this cross member until I build a permanent cross member between these two mounts. And so what I've done here is I've set up a 1x1 bar to go across because I need to measure the angle here and the angle there. They may not be the same. I don't think they will be the same because I made the parts here able to float a bit, so it gave me a little bit more room for adjustment when I was putting everything together. And in fact, this area here, I probably ground back the mount maybe 1/8 of an inch so that it would be flush. So that creates two things. One, the angle is most likely not the same. And secondly, I can't say the distance between these 2 points or the half distance between these 2 points is the center of the bar. So what my plan is I'm going to measure the angle on both sides, measure the distance between the two, and get 2x2 1/8 inch bar that's going to move across. And I'm going to mount that permanently. Well, not right away. First, I'm going to tack it in because I know that mount is going to be too low and will interfere with the drive shaft. Once I have that in place, I can then get a laser level in the center. I still have some marks along the temporary cross members in front and behind me to then mark the center of the bar in between the actual rails of the frame. Once I have that done, now I know where the center is, I have the right angles, but then the drive shaft itself isn't going to be centered either because of the way this is designed behind me. It's actually offset by, I think it's 1 inch. So, but having the drive shaft in, having the center of the frame, I can then design a bit of a bridge or a hump that will be wide enough so by the eye it'll look like it's centered, and tall enough that it won't interfere with the drive shaft when it's aired out. So that is my next couple of steps. Angle, center, figure out the height I need, build that bridge, easy peasy. Okay, so I measured the distance from the crossmember to the drive shaft. I'm getting 2 1/4, and that's from the top. So 1 by 1, you got to remove 1 inch. You're down to 1 1/4. Now I know that this is set up at ride height. Ride height is 5 inches off the ground. So if I air everything down, the back end's going to go down about 5 inches. So this air part of the drive shaft isn't going to go up 5 inches, or the body or the frame isn't going to go down 5 inches at that point, but it's going to be in and around that. So I'm going to do a little bit of calculation, figure out exactly what that number is to make sure I have the right amount of clearance. But rough guess is I have 1 1/4 inch now, 5 inches, which means call it 4 inches of clearance I'm going to need, but I'm going to get a little bit closer with some math. So I used some simple math to figure out what the distance would be that the drive shaft would move around the cross member. And using a right angle triangle, I said, well, this part's going to move 5 inches. I picked 6 just because I want to give a little bit of extra margin of safety. And I know that the drive shaft is 49 3/4 from U-joint to U-joint. So it's going to pivot here at that U-joint, and then it's going to move up where the axle is. Secondly, I know the distance from that U-joint to the cross member is around 19, but I wanted to be safe, so I brought it a little bit closer to this side, which would also create a longer distance than it really will be. And so I used 18 3/4. That makes it really simple to know that the distance from here to the end is going to be 31 inches. Now, with the right angle triangle, you can basically do your rise over your run. It'll equal the same, and then you end up solving for x. So x, which is the distance that the drive shaft would travel by the cross member, is just under 3 3/4. So I know the drive shaft is going to move 3 3/4, so I'll factor that into my calculations for the hump that I'll make. Based on my measurements before, is I already have a gap at ride height of 1 1/4 inch, and the 6 inches, which is really only going to be 5, but the 6 inches is saying it's going to move 3 3/4 from there. So I really only need 2.5 inches of additional clearance to make sure that the drive shaft either would just kiss that part of the hump. So to give a little bit more margin of safety, I'm going to pick 3 inches. So I know that where I lay the cross member, I need to make sure that I have a hump that's 3 inches. So lastly, I need to figure out what the width's going to be, and actually at the narrowest part. And I know currently the offset is 13 32 from the center line. But I actually was staring at this for a little bit and thought, why worry about that? Why only have the hump small? Why not actually bring it very wide, so as wide as I can? Because I think that's going to help me with mounting the upper bar mounts. So let me start to work on some templates and see what makes the most sense. So I'm reminded of the lesson to always double check your work. And I'm glad I'm doing that now before I started cutting things. So the distance I have from the top of this 1x1 to the drive shaft is 2.25 inches. And I thought, well, hey, I'm not going to be this high. I'm actually going to be at the bottom part. So I removed an inch, so 1.25. But the reality is that's going to be the top of my cross member. I have to add 2 more inches below that, which means there's actually an interference as it sits today. Because the plan was, hey, here's the bed mount, I'd be flush coming off of there. So I do have some ideas to change the design a little bit more to come up early, and so then it'll be clearance all the way across. But even coming up the amount that I wanted to isn't going to give clearance when it's fully aired out. So I just got to go back, do a little bit more math to take in consideration that I don't have clearance now. I actually have an interference, so I'm gonna have to move it even higher than I thought I would. So after some staring, some calculations, realizing I messed up some calculations in relation to the drive shaft clearance, I came up with this. So if you could picture my hand being the bed mount, so it's on a slight angle, I first come up off of that bed mount to here, and this is where the upper links are going to mount to. I still need to figure out that design, so that'll come later. And then I need to go up a little bit more and then across, and I'll have the same on the other side. The distance from the bottom here to the bottom here is 5 inches, which is more than enough clearance for the drive shaft when the truck is aired out. Then I picked up this thing, which is 2x2 1/8 inch square tubing, and this is what I'm going to make the cross member out of. I start off with transferring the paper template to the square tubing. I was about to get the cutoff wheel ready, then I came up with an idea. So here's my bandsaw. You may have seen it tucked away in some previous videos, and the last time I used it, it was smoking. And I suspected it's because the gear oil was low and the gears were getting so hot that it was just burning any leftover oil in there. And this thing was leaking from brand new. Tried fixing it under warranty, got a new seal, still leaking. Anyway, I thought now let's get it fixed. Let's just get it going. And so topped it up with oil and it was basically empty. So I think I was right there and got it now back together. So I'm going to try it for the first time to see if it's going to run and not smoke. So let's see. Made a funny sound there, but I turned it off and on and it seems to have cleared it out. Maybe there's just a bit of metal in there. It smells hot though. I'm gonna have to have a look. So yeah, just blowing it out, running it for a bit. There are some chips around. Seems good. I don't smell any burning of anything. So now I'll set it up so I can actually cut the pieces for my cross member. I had to set the machine so it would cut at a 22.5 degree angle, which will give me 45 degrees with two parts together. It does have an angle indicator, but I wanted to double and triple check with an angle finder and the paper template before I started cutting. Once I was happy, I start to cut out the pieces for the cross member. And adding a little bit of lubricant is going to help it cut and stay cool. One thing I noticed here, looking at the part that's remaining, is that the blade is walking a bit. It's further from the piece as it gets down. So anyway, as long as it's more accurate than using a cutoff wheel, this will work. I'll clean up the part that I just cut and see how it looks. So setting to this to 45 degrees. So this would be a 45 degree angle here. I know it from this way. The fitment's not too bad. There is a little bit of a gap here, but I think it's okay. So conclusion is bandsaw makes it a little bit cleaner, less messy. I don't have grinding dust everywhere. I had to do a little bit of cleanup on this part, but it's not bad. So I think I'm going to continue with the bandsaw. It's going to make things a lot easier. The nice thing about this bandsaw is that it's got an adjustable stop. So I set it up for this part, and now putting the next piece, which is going to be a duplicate, I double checked and everything lines up. So when I have to make two of the same pieces, it'll be a lot easier to mimic it, and I don't have to keep on going back and forth to the paper template. Well, there's smoke. Something's up. It's coming from the motor, not from the gearbox. Okay, so I'm going to try this again. I have two theories. One is that the belt or something was holding up at the gearbox side, and the belt was smoking. It's hard to see. There's this plastic cover. So with the plastic cover off, making sure it doesn't hit anything, I'm going to run it for a bit, and if it's coming from the motor itself, then I have to take it apart, make sure there's nothing in there that's starting to burn. So anyways, I got to get through a couple more parts. Ideally I want this just to be fixed, but obviously something's going on, but I want to get through the cross member, then I can work on repairing it. I don't want to repair it, slow me down on the cross member. Oh, and you're not supposed to operate it with this cover off, so don't try this at home. That seemed to work. Well, I'll just have to keep an eye on it. So here's the cross member roughly mocked up. I still need to cut the parts that will tie into the bed mount. I'm going to do those later because I think the distance is going to be slightly off once this is all welded. So my plan is get this welded. That's why I got the MDF out, prep, weld. I think I have a way that I could have it floating in place, and then double check these guys. Once I know that, then I could cut them out and then finish welding it up. So just spend a good amount of time getting this set up and prepped. I started off with a Rolock sanding disc to get off the mill scale. Then I went ahead and used a wire brush on a die grinder to clean up the insides. If you've seen any of my previous episodes, you'll see that I keep on running into porosity. So I want to get this as clean as possible to minimize that. So I'm hoping the wire brush would help. Then I beveled the edges. And lastly, I actually took a torch and heated it up to burn off any residual like oils, lubricants, whatever, just to give me as best of an opportunity to minimize porosity. I lined this up, I centered it, I created a center line, and then I roughly had it in place and created a second line which these pieces are going to go on, and this is where the suspension is going to attach. So I wanted them to be as closely parallel to this bar as possible. These connecting pieces, if they're a little bit off, it's not a problem. This is where I want to make sure, and from the center to here, they're close, maybe a millimeter, half a millimeter off. So it's good enough for what I need right now. Have everything clamped, and other than that, I think it's just going to be figuring out the right steps I do to first tack weld it and then start to fully weld it. I weld half the width of the tubing and alternate left and right to try to minimize excess heat that will cause warpage. Once I take off the clamps, there is slight warpage, but nothing that I'm concerned about. So now that I have it flipped over, the weld's really going to make it move a lot. So I have some 1/8 pieces here that I'm going to actually put underneath where I'm going to actually take the clamps and mount it. So that way, my goal is that it'll be above the weld that I just did, and it gives me a spot that I can clamp down to. And then once I have everything in, clamped down, then I can just finish up the welds. Basically, it's 4 welds and a little bit of the corners because it's too hard to get to those. I'll probably do what I did last time, which is go around, go half, or probably this way, this way, this way, this way, let it cool down, and then do the other half. So I have the Crossmember up on some 123 blocks. This is about 5 inches because going back to my notes, I need to be 5 inches, have that 5-inch gap from the from the drive shaft up to the Crossmember. And doing a quick check, I am at 5. Now I have the laser here, which it's not centered. And now I'm thinking, I think I set this up to be at the top. So I'm about an inch higher. I don't know why I'm an inch higher, but I don't know if I actually need to be 5 inches here, because at ride height, I'm going to be 3 and 3/4 is the movement. 4 inches gives me a 1/4 inch extra room, meaning I only need to be 4 inches. So I think I could bring this down an inch. I think I just have this up by 1 inch too many. So let's see what that looks like. I shim this up another 1/4 inch. I just put 2 1/8 inch. I think they're 1/8 inch. They might be a little small. I might be 1.2 inches, 0.12 inches instead of 0.125 inches. Either way, I'm getting closer. So I think I'm in a good position to really get this lined up. I could double check that I have the adequate height here which I was close to anyways, and shimming it up just gives me much more height than I need. So before moving the laser, I had to figure out or get this in line with it. So I added another 1/8 inch, and actually using the template that goes here, it's really close. It's not quite touching, maybe it's off side to side, I didn't check that part. But in terms of the angle of coming at the top here up to this point, that's on. So some of the angles here might need to be adjusted, but the distance is close. I just have to check the other side. Now I can center everything, get this in the position that it needs to be, and then I can actually make the pieces that connect the two. Well, I have the cross member in place. It's centered this way, and then left to right, I knew it would be off a little bit just because that mount, or at least this part of the mount, is slightly further back. And doing some measurements, this distance from the mount to the cross member at the top here is about 3 5/8, and on the other side it's about 3 11/16. So within a 1/16 of each other. The way I'm going to cut this is I'm going to go a 1/16 higher because it's not 3 5/8, it's a little bit over 3 5/8. I'd rather be a little bit higher and sand it down so I could fit this snugly. The other measurements I've done is confirm that this is 70 degrees. I had measured 69 before, but it's fairly close. The distance here to here, or I should say the angle flat to here, is 135. And if you take 180 minus 45, that's 135. So that means that this angle is coming in at 45 degrees. And just double check this angle here. It's 22.5, which is what you need for a 45-degree angle. So here's the stock material that I've been making the cross member out of, and I already have a 22.5 degree cut here. I will need another 22.5 cut for the driver's side. So if I just solely focus on the passenger side, then I'm going to make an adjustment, cut at the angle I need for the passenger side, which is not 22.5, and then make an adjustment for the driver's side, and then go back to 22.5, because I know the part that actually connects to the cross member that I have built so far is 22.5. So before I start making the piece that's going to tie in on the passenger side, I am going to cut 22.5 on this side. So basically here to the distance that I need is going to be the passenger side, and then here to the distance I need is going to be the driver's side. So the electric motor is not healthy at all. I barely cut through, kept on tripping the breaker, and like an idiot I kept on resetting it, just not staying on. So there's something wrong inside of it. Tried to look at the wiring just to see if there's something in there that's telling of what could be the problem. Everything looks clean. Tried it one last time, I even saw a spark come out of the back. So it's done. I want to continue working on the cross member, so I'll have to go back to the angle grinder, and then at some point I'll get this to a shop to have a look at it and figure it out. This is why I don't like using the cutoff wheel. I can never get it straight. So I'm hoping I left enough material. I'll take a flap disc, smooth it as best, then put it on the disc sander to get it all in the right angle, and hopefully there's enough material that it will fit in to the cross member. So I went ahead and used the cutoff wheel to cut out the remaining pieces that I need to connect the cross member to the bed mount. Same process I did for the rest of the frame when I used the cutoff wheel for that. I then went ahead and prepped it, same with the other pieces. So clean up as much as I could inside, outside, get rid of the mill scale, and then beveled the edges. I then heated up the parts as well just to burn off any residual oils, and I did that too on the bed mounts to make sure that I get a good weld. Originally I was thinking of just welding the pieces, or tack welding the pieces and bringing to the table and finish welding the cross member. I'm thinking now, since the cross member is in the position it needs to be, I will tack these in and finish them on the frame. It does mean there's a couple welds I'll have to do once I flip the frame over, but I already have to do some welding when it's upside down, so I'll just add that to the list. With the last pieces cut, I start tacking them in. I start to take it up and move from the passenger side, back to the driver's side, and back again, doing a few welds at a time. Then I let it cool down so that it's warm to touch. I'll repeat this a few times until it's all welded up, except for the bottom, which I will do once I flip the frame. I'm going to end things off here. Now, this crossmember took a lot more time than I had anticipated to build, and that just happens to be the theme of this project. In the next episode, I'll focus on the upper links, and I will have to order the upper link bars. I'm not sure how long they will take to come in, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you come back for the next one. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next time.